So the January transfer market is in full flow. Celtic got a good bit of their business done early doors with the triple signing of Japanese players coming from the J League: Daison Maeda, Yuki Ideguchi, and Rio Hatate, all coming in from the J League. Ross Goodwin, aka Bhoys Analytics, is on the line with me as we pick through these three guys and what we're going to expect. Ross, Happy New Year. How are you?
Happy New Year to yourself, Enda, and thanks for having me on again. Appreciate it.
All good. So exciting times for Celtic, I guess, making good use of the Japanese market as we sort of expected might happen under Ange Postecoglou, and when Kyogo Furuhashi came through the doors, bit of a surprise player, and I think he's exceeded everybody's expectations, judging on the fact that nobody really seen what he had done in the J League. Firstly, before we get into the individual talents yourself in themselves, are you expecting broadly with the three signings coming in now from the J League that they might do the same?
Yeah, mostly. It's a case of we've seen Kyogo come in and be a huge success, so it's a basis of how much do you trust Ange as a scout in a sense as well as a manager. It's pretty clear he understands the game and how he wants to play and the types of players that he needs. So he's been watching these players in the J League for years now. He knows exactly what they can do. He's came up against them, or he's managed them, so he knows exactly what he's going to get from these players, and he knows they can fit them right into his system. So in my opinion, it's a case of, do you trust Ange as a manager? Yeah. Do you trust him as a scout? Is more the question here, and I think the answer so far has been yes. When it's been players he's directly looked at and brought in from the league he's been an expert in, he's only had Kyogo so far. It's been 100% success rate, but if you're getting 3 out of 4, 2 out of 4 correct, that's still a very good rate of success and transferring players across the globe to a new league, new culture. So he's done a great job integrating Kyogo so far, and I don't see any reason why any of these three players would be any different.
Yeah, there's a broader discussion that we could have if we had an extra 30 minutes to get into, but generally, is it a worrying sign that Ange is the guy that seems to be making the decisions when, if he's not here in a year or two, we might have players that he bought specifically for his system, and then the manager comes in and we have to start rebuilding once again?
Well, this is the issue. You want the kind of, usually you'd have your director of football model, you'd have continuity planning, keeping the kind of structure and the type of football very similar. We can only hope that that's kind of going on in the background, and that if Ange does go, and to be honest, it's looking likely he will step up a level after a number of years eventually. The club really need to be ready to bring in someone that's going to play a fairly similar style of football. Otherwise, you're going to need to remove most of the team and bring in players that are more suited. So this is thing, contingency planning, having lists of managers that play similar styles at all time. This is things normal clubs should be doing on a regular basis and keeping updated lists. But for the moment, we don't need to really worry about that right now. These are players Ange knows, he's brought them in. I guess you could also say, like, how's our own scouting department doing? Well, the case is he knows these players are good. He doesn't need to go to the scouting department. He's watched them already. He's done the most a scout can actually do for these players, which is watch them for probably hundreds, if not thousands of minutes already. So for the short term, this is really good news. Long-term stuff at the club, it's always, well, as we were before we got Ange in, it's still questions to be asked, but it's an early sign of intent from Nicholson, who's just taken over, get the transfers done early. We know Peter Law would like to wait around to the end of the window to shave a few £1,000s off, despite the damage that would do long term. So it's quite good to see the club being a bit more progressive in their actions so far. So maybe that's a promising sign going forward.
Yeah, big time. Well, let's get into the ones that we know are definitely coming. We might touch on Johnny Kenny at the end, who's due to sign from Sligo Rovers in the League of Ireland. We'll start with probably, I think, the most exciting one, and that's Daison Maeda, who is joining as a left winger or a striker, depending on what system you're trying to play. So let's get into him. What is he going to bring to the table that we don't have already?
Well, he's going to bring a serious backup option to Kyogo that fits the system. Right now, we've been using Hatate and Giacomakis, or really just or Abada, even now that our squad was running so thin. But we've not really had anyone that can maintain the energy and pace of Kyogo's press for the entire game. So I think Maeda will be used as primarily a backup to Kyogo. You can't be running around 90 minutes every 3 days the way Kyogo does, or he's going to pick up injuries like we've seen. So bringing on Maeda for the final 30 minutes of games is something that I think will be quite common theme under Ange over the next few months. He can also be deployed out wide. The issue is he's very different from how Jota plays. Jota is much more technically gifted, creative, beats the man. Maeda is not the most technically gifted player in the world. He's not really one for linking up play. He's very much in the box is where he's dangerous, and outside is where he's less dangerous. Not a lot of touches. He's really about intelligence in the box, getting space for himself and getting goals. That's why I think he'll be more prioritised to the central role. This season's been the first season where he's really prioritised that central role, and I think he's scored 14 goals and 1 assist from the central role, which is better than his output out in the wing with less minutes. So I think he's kind of naturally acclimatised to the centre forward role. This probably will likely see the end of Hatate getting moved on and freeing up the wages. And Giakoumakis might be used as kind of an alternating option for holding up the ball, or if we want to go more route one into the box near the end of games if we're not winning. But very much I do think Maeda is going to be this backup striker. We can see that from his output in Japan. He's 0.6 XG per 90. If he's 0.4 or above in Scotland, he's going to be doing fairly well for Celtic regardless. So we want to see that kind of energy coming on the pitch. And it's just going to be important to have that kind of legs and running power coming on the pitch against tired bodies in Scotland. Kind of much more, maybe the J League, much more cultural. They're usually fitter. They can run longer, better stamina, better diets, things like that. So I'm very excited for Maeda to come in. I think it'll take a lot of the burden off that Kyogo's been holding in his back so far this season.
So in terms of his energy levels in his underlying data, can you tell how good or otherwise he is at pressing? Because I think that's the key one.
Yeah, so the two metrics I use from them, the kind of Y-Scout data, are the successful defensive actions per 98 and possession adjusted interceptions per 90. So that's when you're cutting out passing and how many times you're actually getting in the face of the opposition. I think these are good metrics for measuring how forwards defend, because generally we see quite low numbers from players that are attacking. They're not going to be really pressing defenders as much or winning as much ball. Maeda's numbers for these stats are ridiculous. You're talking maybe somewhere close to more than what Ryan Christie was outputting as a number 8, which is where you're probably expecting those kind of numbers. He's got 7.3 successful defensive actions per 90. In Japan, Kyogo was only at 4.8, so it's a huge jump. And possession adjusted interceptions is 5.46, which again, huge jump from Kyogo's numbers in Japan, which were only 2.38. This guy pretty much built to run. He's very hard to play against because you're pretty much always going to be playing risky first-time passes. You don't want to be put under pressure by him. If you're going to get caught in that final third, you're going to enter the final third transition and you're going to give away key chances. So keeping Maeda away from you is playing fast is the best way to keep Maeda away from you. But teams in Scotland just aren't going to be capable of doing that with the amount of pace he's going to play at and the amount of pressure he's going to be able to put opposition teams under. This is kind of what we've been kind of looking for from Ange. If Jota's not going to play in that left wing, although Maeda might not be the most technically gifted, winning the ball higher up more often, having much more defensive solidity as he's able to do the running back and forwards much more often. And he's obviously got a good goal output in the box as well. So getting the ball in the box more often, getting him on the end of crosses. He's actually I think he's only 5'8". He scores like a ridiculous amount of headers, which I've seen brought up by a few. He's at 0.17 headers per 90, which would put him just about top in Scotland, which is pretty insane for a guy that's only 5'8". But it speaks to the amount of intelligence in his game, running onto the ends of the ball, so he's not man marked or generating space away from centre backs. It's all about movement, it's all about pressing, and this guy's really good at it. This is why Ange just brought him in. He's going to be able to really complement the team very well. I'd be very surprised if Maeda didn't go on to be a success at Celtic. If you're putting in that amount of running, especially against teams in Scotland, you're generally always going to get good output eventually.
And just before we finish up on Maeda, you mentioned that he might be sort of a replacement for Kyogo or a rotation player for Kyogo. What are the chances, do you reckon, that he'll play Maeda and Kyogo together and then have Jota in a more floating role to complement the running that they're putting in?
Well, it's something more like the 3-5-2 we've seen more recently. Yeah, I think it's quite likely. I wrote a piece for the Celtic way back in July looking at how Ange altered his Australia team to move to a 3-5-2. I think he went to the World Cup and maybe got a bit of a reality check on the gap in skill level between his team and the other teams and wanted to try and solidify the central area a lot more. So he pulled the 3 centre-backs in and put and went to the 2-striker system. So I think it's something he's very accustomed to using. He's clearly researched it and understands how to use that system. if you're using two pressers, I think it becomes quite effective. You don't really need the wide players pushing up as much. You can have Maeda and Kyogo right on the centre backs if they're only playing a back four system. It also gives, we've seen the benefits to having the two strikers there against St Johnstone. Played the five at the back, low block, but with two players running about in the box, it's a lot more difficult to defend. And we saw Maeda getting all sorts of space against St Johnstone that he wasn't afforded against St Mirren when they sat in the box for 90 minutes. So I think it is something we could see, especially maybe in Europe. I could imagine Kyogo and Maeda playing, especially counter-attacking football. They'd be extremely effective at it. Very clever players, very fast, and if you put them up against teams, especially when we go up against Bodo Glimt, who aren't going to be fully match fit, you really want to be killing that tie at Celtic Park the first game, because you're not going to get a better opportunity to beat a team at that level.
Desperately, Celtic needed another person in midfield, and they got that with Yuki Ideguchi, Gucci as he refers to himself. This was desperately needed. Is he going to bring in what Celtic need in that midfield?
Well, I thought his signing was probably the most interesting. It was probably the number 6 role wasn't probably one people thought of, but Ange just probably had a look at the resources at his disposal and went, we need someone else in there. We need a better rotation option that makes more sense to how we want to play. We brought in McCarthy. I think everyone's at probably a level where he's probably not the most suited to Ange's style. He can't do he's not got the kind of mobility to do running, and he's been injured for a good chunk of the time he's been here. And as you get older, those numbers will only get worse and the injuries will get more frequent. So Ideguchi came in with a few people saying maybe he's not up to the standard. He obviously had the early move to Leeds, which was a ridiculous career decision. Don't move to teams if you don't have a work permit. It should be pretty common sense by now. But when he's went back to Japan, his defensive numbers stayed pretty consistent between the time Gambo Saka finished second in the league and when they finished 13 in the league. So defensively, he's doing around 10, 11 successful defensive actions per 90. That's the highest. That if we compare that to the sample size in Scotland, that'd be around the highest. Defensive duels, a lot of defensive duels per 90, around the highest in the league, regardless of if his team are more dominant or less dominant. His passing and creative and offensive output really did fall off in his second season, as quite a lot of people have said. However, as they'd finished second the year previous, they did qualify for the Asian version of the Champions League. So, and it was during kind of more of a COVID season, so they were playing a lot of games very quickly, and they just didn't have the squad depth to really deal with it. And it did seem like fatigue really took its toll on the Gambo Saka side. And we've seen that with Ange's Yokohama F. Marino side. They won the league and then tumbled down the table the next year as a busy fixture schedule took its toll on probably a smaller squad than you would have had previously. But no, I'm fairly confident Ideguchi can come into a 6. I don't think he's coming in to be a starter. I think that's something a lot of people will need to get around their heads. I think a lot of people have had him coming in playing the 8 role. I wouldn't have him there. He's more sit at the base of the midfield, recycle possession, play more vertical, longer passing. I can see him being used in Europe quite frequently. McGregor's often, especially against higher level opponents in a defensive capacity, has been caught out quite a few times. I think Bayer Leverkusen away, his positioning could just be off slightly, just because it's not his natural game. I would still very much expect Callum McGregor to be starting at the base of that midfield with what it's going to be, Rogic and Hatate in front of him. But no, there's a lot of interest. Ideguchi's a really cheap signing. He's probably not coming in the highest wage. He's got a point to prove. I'm quite excited to see how he gets on the most, because he's the one that's probably the most guesswork how he's going to perform on this side. It probably does spell the end for players like Soro and McCarthy. I don't know, because that puts McCarthy behind McGregor, Beaton and Ideguchi, so a 4th choice player for one position. And I don't think Ange is going to go to that double pivot anytime soon or use it very frequently. So it could be a case of get to the summer and start freeing up some wages in that position and use the resources elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And at this stage of the season, the way the team are playing, it's not really about bringing in players that are starters. It's just kind of bringing in better replacements. And if Ideguchi is a step up on the likes of Soro and Ange trusts him to come in and do that job where he can just actually have substitutes that he trusts to put on the pitch, that's a massive bonus for the rest of the season. Rio Hatate is the 3rd Japanese player coming in. He's coming from Kawasaki, and he's been described as a utility player. And the reason he's described as that is because if you take a look at this guy's career, he's played left back, he's played center mid, he's played attacking mid, he's even played up front at times. So this is a jack of all trades kind of player.
See, I always found it quite harsh just because he got forced into the kind of left back position just due to I think they got 2 injuries to whoever their left backs were, and he was the best technical footballer they probably had that could fill in. But the season before, he played as a forward the season before, and he was one of the best forwards in the league. And then he goes to left back, and then he came much more into the central role in the second half of the season. The guy ranks near the top for when he was at left back. He ranks just about top for every single passing metric. When he goes into midfield, he breaks the line. He gets a lot of creativity, a lot of goal threat. So much a ridiculous amount of mobility as well. I've got it here: over 7 successful defensive actions per 90. Again, Ryan Christie-esque numbers. I think I described him as what Christie and Juranovic kind of combined when you kind of look at their left back and central data. He does a lot of running. He's very good in the ball. He's technical. He can dribble. He can beat the man. He's exciting. I'm most excited about. I think he does the most on the pitch, and he's the player we really needed the most. We really needed someone else in there instead of Turnbull and Rogic, especially after losing Turnbull for a few months. He's the one that's going to come right in, and he'll be starting. I'd be very surprised if he isn't starting against Hibs, and that's in that central three. Come the 17th as well. He's a very talented player. Not been announced. We've not seen him at Celtic at Lennoxtown yet, but hopefully he gets enough days in his legs. And obviously, all these players from the J League are coming in match fit. Like their season has only finished last month. It's not like they need a full pre-season to get fit again. They'll be coming in and up to speed very quickly. Which is a big bonus as well. It just means you have to manage their minutes till the summer because that would be a full season and a half of straight football they've been playing. But they've had 2 or 3 weeks off now, and they should be able to get right back into it. But no, Hatate is going to be a ridiculous talent in Scotland. I think he is very suited to Ange Ball. He can break lines, he can create, he can score, he gets into the box, and if needed, he can play left back, which is what some people seem to want. But I'd much rather have my left back be left-footed. I think we've seen the benefits of having Taylor in there over Juranovic and being able to push him much further up the pitch. When you profile Hatate and Juranovic when they're at left back, their heat maps are basically identical. They get to about 5 yards before the 18-yard box, and they won't touch the ball any further because they can't go onto their bad foot. No, he's a very, very talented player, very technical. Can pass with both feet. Seems fairly comfortable with both feet. Very much looking forward to seeing him.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with Celtic's midfield at the minute is that you've got 2 number 8s who are essentially the same player in Tom Rogic and David Turnbull. Not very dynamic, very good on the ball, very creative, but when it comes to running, they just can't get up the yards. Is Hatate someone that's going to come in and have, by what you're describing with Juranovic, he's a very tactical player, but does he have the dynamism to match it as well?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a player probably a bit more technically gifted than Ryan Christie, but similar in style. Very, especially when he played in the 8, a lot of running, a lot of defensive work. But I think Ryan Christie, a lot of his game was often let down by maybe a lot of people point to his finishing, but I sometimes thought his maybe short passing or the basics in his game were always a little bit rough around the edges. Hatate, very technically gifted player. I think he's going to link play very well, especially if the forwards looking to break those lines at the back. He can take on players and see what he's going to do when he gets in the ball. He's going to be able to drive forward with pace. Now, Rogic will complete a lot of dribbles per game, beating the man, but see if he's trying to break away, he can't really break away from anyone with his pace. Hatate's going to be able to take that ball on the counter-attack and be able to actually break away from the retreating defence. So that's going to create a lot more space when we get these transitions and get the ball forward much quicker, which is really what Andrew's looking for. He wants to get that ball forward as fast as possible and get players in the box generating space for those players that are coming forward with the ball. So I think it's going to be a really good match, especially if players like Kyogo. I think Hatate and Kyogo will link up very well coming in.
And just to finish up then, another signing coming in, it's not been confirmed yet, but it will be in the next 24 hours or so, and that's Johnny Kenny coming in from Sligo Rovers in the League of Ireland. I'll give you my broad specs on him because I've seen him play, and then you can tell me what the underlying data says about him. So he's been signed 150,000. That was his release clause with Sligo Rovers. It's a good bit of business. Again, young, cheap talent coming in. He's 18 years old. He's a very raw talent from what I've seen. He's really, really good. Good at getting behind the fence and calm enough when he gets into the box. But as a normal 18-year-old he is quite raw, and there is space to develop. From what you're seeing in his underlying data, do you think he's going to come into the Celtic B team and then eventually take the step up, or do you think this is just a little bit of business from Celtic stopping Hibs from getting him and then maybe they can get a little bit of profit when they sell him on.
Well, this is the thing. He shows up fairly well in the data. Obviously it's League of Ireland, so it's a step down. But he's also only 18. He's playing against adults every week. I think he's actually quite an accomplished finisher. Like, I think the way he strikes the ball, he hits the ball really, really hard. You can always tell when a striker hits the ball a lot harder than others. He has 0.55 XG per 90, which is obviously League of Ireland is a step down. But if you put a player like Kenny in the B team against fourth tier players, he should be able to probably do better than that. League of Ireland is probably a better standard than the Lowland League. I would imagine. Well, I'm guessing there, but I'd imagine it is, since it's the whole of Ireland. And he has a lot, regardless of what he's got a lot of shots per 90. He's got 3.25 shots per 90. Like the most in Scotland, in the Scottish League is 3.77. So he's only a little bit off that. So no matter what, he's got good movement. He gets about the pitch a lot. He gets himself into good positions. It's pretty clear the boy's got a brain on him to actually get away from defenders to get shots away. And he's pretty accomplished with both feet from what I've seen so far. Maybe things to work. He doesn't get on the ball as much, but I guess League of Ireland, a bit more Route 1 football. Sligo Rovers only generally get about 50% possession per game, so they're not exactly wholly dominating games. But no, I was actually fairly impressed. Over 4 touches in the box per game as well, which is really high. If you compare it to the highest in our league is only 5.5. So he's definitely a big threat. He gets a lot of shots away. He's in the box a lot, and and because he's a good finisher, when he's in the box, he's likely going to score. So I'm going to imagine he's going to go into the B team, and they're probably going to start noticing he's probably too good for that level. I'd suspect in the summer he'll be maybe loaned out to a Premiership team or a Premiership team, maybe your likes of St Mirren's, Livingston's. He actually looked quite a big kind of physical prospect as well. He looked a bit bigger than the usual forwards Ange's been bringing in. But I think there's definitely raw talent there to be developed. And if Celtic and Ange have looked at him and went, we can develop him into a better player, then you've got to trust the manager's opinion on that.
Yeah, I would imagine he's going to go out and loan sooner than the summer. I think it would be a hindrance to his talent to keep in the B team. He would be better off developing in the League of Ireland if that was the case. And but I would say the idea is to loan him out to some team and get him first team football for the time being, see how he develops. But he is an exciting prospect for sure, one of the League of Ireland's best young talents. So let's see how he gets on at Celtic when he eventually comes in. Before we finish up, any other positions you think Celtic need to strengthen up in before the January transfer window closes?
I think you kind of need another 8/10 in there. I put out a thread on Hans Wolf from Mönchengladbach. You can get his data on FB Ref because it's a top 5 league, so you can have a look at his pressing data. And then the attacking, middle, and defensive third, he's in the 88th percentile or above in all 3 of them. Very mobile player. Maybe not as good technically on the ball for the Bundesliga, but again, it's the Bundesliga, so you don't need to be. If you're dropping down to Scotland, your technical ability is going to start to level off. Huge output on goals and assists when he was at Salzburg for 3 straight seasons when he was a teenager. Got unlucky when he went to Germany, leg break, but I think he's the kind of player that Ange should be looking to bring in, even if it is just loan with an option to buy. He's played at a top level. He's played at teams similar to Celtic where they're dominant in the league, dominant in possession. He's very mobile. He's a big presser, and he's also left-footed as well, so a bit more of a raider kind of attacking midfielder. So if you want to have Hatate and Wolf as kind of your more mobile attacking midfielders, and then Roger and Turnbull as your more technical ones, I think that'd be a good four to actually be going on with. And getting him in now while he's available, and the manager said he's surplus to requirements, he's never going to drop lower in value than he is right now. He's only 22. If you can get a player of that quality in, you should be really looking to do it when you can.
Yeah, well, we shall wait and see. Talks ongoing between the club and Jota and Cameron Carter-Vickers as well. So exciting times to be supporting Celtic. Ross Goodwin, Bhoys Analytics. If they want to follow you, it's Bhoys Analytics on Twitter, and they can get you on the Celtic way as well, right?
Yeah.
All right, good stuff. Thanks, Ross.
No worries. Thanks for having me on, Enda.